Welcome to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. This podcast addresses many topics around mental health and sexuality. It may not be suitable for minors. Some topics may elicit a trigger or emotional response, so please care for yourself accordingly. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes is by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
Hello, this is Natasha Helfer. This is the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We are having one of our Symmetry counseling panel discussions where I have several of my providers with me to talk about some current events that have been happening. Specifically, I think today we're going to be mainly sticking with LDS/Mormon land, that we oftentimes do this. We try just about once a month where we talk about things that are going on either in religious communities or the world at large that have to do with the intersections we work with, like sexuality, religion, mental health, and wellness. And we feel really passionate about those topics. It's kind of our areas of expertise. So we like to talk about some of those things that are coming up. And on this podcast, we really try to attack shame, like at its core. I think that's a big issue that most people have around a lot of those kinds of topics. So that's what we're here to do. And with me today, I've got Michelle Peets, who's here in Salt Lake City area. I've got Trisha Jensen, who is also here in the Salt Lake City area. And I've got Sally Osborne, who is out in California. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here. And we have some kind of, I don't know if cool things to talk about, but definitely interesting things to talk about and the impact that they're having on our communities. So welcome to the show, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
So I'll start with you, Sally. I kind of have asked both Sally and Trisha to bring kind of a topic that is happening currently in our world. And so why don't you go ahead and get us started?
The talk that Elder Monson gave, that's called, referred to as the musket fire talk. He gave a talk a couple years ago at BYU. And it was basically...
I think it was Elder Holland.
Elder Holland. My bad. I don't even remember the dudes' names anymore. I am happy about that, actually. So he gave this talk. It was basically a homophobic talk. And he also called out Matt Easton, who previously had come out in his BYU valedictorian speech, which he had approved by his professors and his people to do. And he was called out, and basically the talk said, if we let students commandeer the stage to profess their sexuality, what's next? And it was pretty bad. And I actually was able to talk with Maddie on my podcast, Peace Out, about that experience that he had. And he, even though he had left the church and he was living his awesome gay life in California, it really did hurt. It really, really impacted him and was pretty brutal, doubling down on the hate that he had gotten. And now recently, they decided that all new incoming BYU students, this talk will be required reading for them as they enter BYU, which is an additional punch to the gut and just shows people how unsafe the school actually is for queer students. And there's two parts of me, one part of me is like, well, thanks for showing us your true colors and not trying to hide behind, the facade that everyone's welcome, because that really frustrates me. The Mormon people like to pretend that the doctrine isn't what the doctrine is, which is we are unequal in the church. We cannot have the same rights, and we can't go to the temple and get married and go to the celestial kingdom. Honestly, that's the goal, and we can't do it. Queer people. And so when they say everyone's welcome, it feels really manipulative to me and untrue because we can sit in the pews and whatever, but why would we want to do that? We're second class citizens. So I like when the church really shows its true colors so that people can like see and then and not give them false hope. And then on the other hand, obviously, like a lot of BYU students have to go to BYU. They don't have a choice. Financial reasons, familial reasons, academic reasons. There's lots of reasons that queer kids don't really get the choice to not go there, and then they have to feel very unsafe. What do you guys think?
Thank you, Sally, for that update.
Yeah.
I too was it's so interesting. I mean, we have so many talks that leaders give, in general conferences and in the Ensign magazine. And, there's quite a few really good talks, about all kinds of, positive aspects of what people in this community might consider doctrine. And here's this talk that got so much pushback, had so many concerning aspects to it. I mean, you focused on one or two things that were said, but the thing that was actually most concerning to me, especially in the climate that we're currently in with gun violence, and gun violence at schools in particular, we've had quite a few shootings at quite a few university campuses. And he, I think, very irresponsibly and quite like perniciously brought up the image of musket fire, that it is the job of stalwart, Latter-day Saints to stand up to, the philosophies of the world, which is kind of how they treat, queerness, right? Is that it's a philosophy of the world. It's not really a part of somebody's identity, and that we should stand up with our muskets, like, pioneers of old did or something. And that brings up some really problematic imagery that people who are trying to follow the leaders, and see these leaders as spokespeople from God, himself, it doesn't take much imagination to imagine somebody going, well, it's my responsibility to actually take, violent means to this population, which actually puts, everybody in danger. Because if you have a school shooting where certain people are the target, that doesn't mean that those are the only people who are targeted in something like a mass shooting. So, to me, that was just so incredibly astronomically irresponsible from a church leader to talk like that, especially towards a marginalized community that we already know is at danger for violence, for hate crimes, for suicidality, for mental health disorders. So yeah, that's my initial thoughts. What about you, Michelle and Tricia?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about what you just said about doublespeak, essentially, and how, for years, the church was trying to do this big umbrella type of Mormonism. And I think back to the early 2000s and when they were kind of almost making it seem like this was more inclusive. There's room for you here. I mean, Elder Holland himself gave a talk in General Conference where he talks about we're all part of an orchestra and there's room for everyone. And in that list, when he said people, from all types of backgrounds, he included sexual orientation in that. And I remember it being this hugely celebrated thing of like, whoa, Elder Holland's such a beloved apostle who so many people love, particularly on their missions, is saying there is room for queer folks here in this community. And then to turn it around years later, that was such a shock. And I remember in Tyler Glenn's story, when he talked about this, of there's this big tent Mormonism in the early 2000s. And then all of a sudden, when the LGBTQ exclusion policy came out in 2015, it was such a slap in the face. It was so surprising. And yet it did give, I think, some people closure, right? Of oh, okay, this is where the church stands. But then, when the church reverses it, 4 years later, it's oh, okay, really, where do you stand on this? It's really hard to be in relationship with a person or an institution when you don't know what their boundaries are. And you're sitting over there saying, are you, first of all, going to accept me? Is there room here? And then am I even safe with you? And so, to your point, I think it does real violence to talk out of both sides of your mouth. Yes, life is complex and relationships are complex and our boundaries are ever changing. We have to communicate those things in relationship. But to vacillate to these extremes, I think is just like it's untenable, I think, for the organization. And so we're seeing like the institution, or not the institution, but like it's people being torn apart because of how the church can't really decide where they stand on this.
Register now for Natasha's upcoming Reclaiming Female Sexuality workshop. Use promo code GIRLSDAY to buy 3 tickets or more for $165 each. Make sure to include the names of the others in your group in the comments at checkout. To register, go to natashahelfer.com/retreat. Symmetry is now offering ketamine services. To find out more, go to simcounseling.com/ketamine-services. You can now register for Unwind Together, an exclusive retreat for couples, October 3rd through 6th, 2024, and use the code UNWIND225 for an early bird discount. To register, go to natashahelfer.com/retreat.
I think that the church is struggling where to stand because the church is divided, right? You have people that are, defenders of the LGBTQ, and then you have the Orthodox that are anti still. And so the church is divided on this. I know a lot of like Orthodox members with the whole musket fire talk. They were like, oh my, it's so blown out of proportion. He didn't say calling up arms. He just was bringing up like a metaphor. The problem is that the metaphor was horrible. Even if it's a metaphor, even if the orthodoxy is right? It's a horrible metaphor. And there is pretty big group of people that are a part of the LGBT community that go to BYU or that will be going to BYU. And now it's an unsafe environment for them. And I don't know if I think the church is at a rock and a hard point on this issue. And I think they chose Elder Holland on purpose because of the talk about the orchestra. That was on purpose.
Okay.
And he was selected.
I'm curious about that phrase that you say the church is divided. The doctrine is the doctrine.
The doctrine is always changing.
Not on this. The doctrine's never changed.
I think what you're both correct. I think you're both correct in that when we talk about the church, there's of course the bigger population of the members.
The members' opinion, sure, is divided. The church and its doctrine is clear.
But is it? Because you have, Charlie Bird, who has a calling, he can't
go in the temple.
Can he not?
No.
Do you know that?
Yes. He cannot have a temple recommend.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know
enough about
Oh,
those.
yes, I do
feel
know.
like the leadership roulette is insane, right?
Gay
and you have people after the
2015
that went after their members to excommunicate them. And then you had other leaders still giving callings. So it's inconsistent.
But a calling, of course, Bishop Roulette. And they're privileged. A white cis guy who is a public figure is going to be treated differently. They don't want negative publicity. But he is not going in the temple. He is not going to be able to get all the keys to the kingdom. He's not.
Yeah, I mean, the only way that you can be a temple recommend holding person, especially, and whether he goes to the temple or not, he can't get married in the temple.
Yeah.
His husband, right? So that's for sure. So I think again, you're both correct in that. I think that Sally, what you're saying is that until there is doctrinal change from the top down, that's it. That's what it is. Now, how people in the church are managing those doctrinal interpretations and what they're doing in their own wards and what they're doing in their own stakes, that does differ significantly, right? Significantly. We know that. And certain people, I think, do enjoy certain privileges in the church in certain geographical areas or certain wards that in other spaces they would never enjoy. And I've definitely seen that coming out of like a very conservative stake, like in Wichita, Kansas, where people were not even really allowed to take the sacrament. We're not allowed to do some of these things that you're mentioning, Trisha, maybe is happening in a ward here in Utah, right? And so I think the point that Sally, that you're making is that the doctrine, the understanding, the way the leadership is dealing with this is completely discriminatory, right? There's no room. And I think, Trisha, what you're saying is that in pockets, people try to make room, but that room that's made is still very lacking. It's still very lacking because it doesn't come from a space that there's actually doctrinal space for LGBTQ members to be part of our, eternal family. There just isn't.
And BYU is trying to have a lot more control over their professors, and if their professors are active and if they have tempo recommends and what they're teaching. And I do think, do not get me wrong, I think it's horrible what BYU is doing. I am absolutely an LGBTQ ally, and what they did to Matt was ridiculous and horrible. And I don't think they even understand the ramifications, or if they do, they just don't care. But that doesn't change that you do have kids coming into BYU, part of that community, whether they're not open with their parents or trying not to be queer. And I think it's really dangerous to set up an institution, a college education, university institution that is so anti.
Yeah, let's make room for some comments from our listeners. So Kelly Trust says it's absolute evidence that there's not divine guidance that he would promote violence. Or maybe not. That old God I knew was pretty violent, truly irresponsible, right? So I think that's, how do you see God, right? That's an interesting concept. Jacob Willis says, my sister analyzing Mormonism on TikTok was excommunicated after she came out as gay. And then he gives another comment saying the doctrine on homosexuality won't ever change. And that is what the leaders are saying, that it's not going to change, that marriage is always going to be between man and a woman. And he continues to say that is such a fundamental and core doctrine, and that if they ever tried changing it, the church would crumble. I don't see them ever giving in on that one. And that's definitely an opinion. It remains to be seen, right? To see what would happen 30 years from now, since we are, I think, moving forward in an untenable way. But then we're also seeing a lot of this backsliding, not even in just the LDS Mormon church, but in our culture overall, as far as LGBTQ rights, so it's just interesting, the backlash effect of change and when it happens and how you can see that live right now in our world. So I think another thing that I wanted to just bring up about this, because a lot of people kind of to what you're saying, Trish, as far as like what my Orthodox members say to this is like, well, then just, and I think Sally, you kind of brought this up too. It's like, well, just don't go to BYU. Just don't, if you don't agree with it, nobody's forcing you to go to BYU. So I think that ignores two fundamental things. One is that, like Sally already mentioned, for a lot of people in this country, if you've got parents who you're still under their kind of economic space, you can't just go get federal grants or whatever. If your parents make money in this country, you have to put in their income and everything. So parents still have a lot of control over where they will decide that they will offer monies for an adult child to go to school. So whether that's cultural control or financial control, there's a lot of emphasis. There's a lot of Mormon parents that I've known, LDS parents, who will say, if you don't go to BYU, we're not paying for your education. That's a reality. And so a lot of people are having to deal with that kind of stuff. The second thing that's completely ignored in that concept is that a lot of queer folks are growing up in this community with what's called identity foreclosure. You're not encouraged to understand your orientation. You're not encouraged to explore your orientation. You're not encouraged to even validate your orientation if it's anything other than cis het. And Sally's one of those examples. And so then emerging adulthood is kind of when some of this exploration actually is developmentally appropriate to be doing this kind of work when you're 15 to 25 years old, right? That decade is very, very optimized for doing self-discovery work on your own identity. And so you may go to BYU not understanding your sexual orientation, thinking for sure, I'm going to keep the honor code, right? And I'm going to do all the good things and I'm going to be the good Mormon kiddo, right? And you may be not even understanding yet the internal struggle that you're about to enter into, or have been kind of like feeling, but not really having the language or the support or the process available to you to even start understanding yourself from this perspective. And a lot of people are doing that work in those emerging adulthood years when they're already at this university. So, and then I just want to add too, that this is one of the things I struggle with in this country with religious freedom. It's not religious freedom. It's religious, power to discriminate and force our religious beliefs on other people. And this university receives federal monies. So if you want to discriminate against other people, okay, you have a right to do that in this country. You can be an asshole and have, shitty beliefs. That's fine. But don't use federal monies that are somehow, this is where I just don't understand where the protections are for all the classes of people. We're not supposed to discriminate against sexual orientation. We're not supposed to discriminate against religion. We're not supposed to discriminate against
race
or ethnicity, right? Those are protected aspects that this government protects, but then our government gives a university that is not protecting that monies for federal funds, for federal scholarships and things like that. That's just what drives me nuts. So any final thoughts on this before we move on to the next topic? And I'm already getting feisty and swearing, so that's lovely.
I just want to shout out to the BYU kids. Like, if anyone hears this, like, you're not alone, and please find community. Find those people. Go to the queer clubs. There's Encircle in Provo. Find some safe people that you can talk to, and don't keep it all inside, because that will help you get through it.
Thank you. Yeah, and just as a reminder too, this talk was given to faculty. Originally, this talk was given to faculty, and I know that there's a lot of faculty at BYU who is trying to be affirming. The counseling center at BYU Provo is actually very good, and that's another resource. Affirmation.org is another resource for LDS folks who are, on the LGBTQ rainbow spectrum. Any final thoughts from you, Michelle?
Yeah, and the Out Foundation was created by some BYU alum who are queer and seek to provide scholarships or other financial support to BYU students who may feel isolated. So yeah, there are so many. And I think the good news is a lot of times, like when you find one person or one organization you connect in some way, you kind of tend to like find it all. And so, yeah, totally echoing that idea of just like find your people. There are plenty.
There's Cougar Pride. Cougar Pride is an organization that's on I think on campus. So, or at least off campus, not affiliated with BYU, but they offer support as well. So yes, find your people. I think to Sally's point, if at all possible, choose a school where you're not going to be discriminated. So if there is anything that you can do to try to not go to a school where you're going to be faced with these issues, I think that would be better for your mental health. I would also encourage parents, if they're listening, to realize that you don't know often if your kid is LGBTQ. You don't know it. I think a lot of times the church just treats everybody like they're not. Like we're talking to a sea of people who are obviously not LGBTQ. And no, you have people, a big part. I mean, we've got like probably easily anywhere from 3 to 20% of the population who is questioning, thinking, identifying differently than you might think. So when you're saying these words, when you're talking as a parent in your home, you don't know if your child is the person that you're attacking already. So, really be thinking, is this a university where I want my child, who I don't even know where they're going to end up as an adult, to go and have these kinds of, restrictions placed on their identity development? Right? Is that really what we want?
Okay, one more thing about that then. I'm thinking about a lot of my clients who are a lot of times like in mixed faith marriages, and one of them has exited or has like started just questioning certain policies in the church, particularly around the harm issue. And yeah, that they're thinking about their kids and they're like, we don't know, our kids are young, who knows what their sexuality, what their gender identity is. And they're trying to navigate that conversation with their spouse who is still participating in the church, and they're really wanting to, continue to take the kids to church. And that's such a huge dilemma, like that parents carry, right? I think most parents want to protect their children, but there's kind of this existential angst around like, what if I'm placing my kid in this environment that is telling them that they are essentially broken? And I'm not a parent myself, but I sit in that space a lot, and I'm like constantly contemplating what that would be like and how terrifying that would be. And then when I think about it from my perspective of my own life and the times that I've been in danger, or when I've been like taught that there's something fundamentally wrong with me, and then continuously being steeped in that environment, what really helped me was having just even a few safe people who were able to say, but no, you're actually okay. And no, you're worthy of love. And so I don't want to, like, the environment is so, like, yes, let's remove people from environments as much as we possibly can. Like, I think that's the big issue here. And that feels really big for us to ask as a society. How do we make environments less toxic? How do we make them safe for everyone? As mental health professionals, that's like constantly on all of our minds. And in the meantime, to be a safe person for the people around you is so paramount. And I've come to understand that more and more. And so like with those parents who are terrified of their kids going to church, I'm like, yeah, that fear is there. And I wish that wasn't happening. And your influence as that affirming person is also going to be really powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how the research shows it doesn't take that many affirming people to really make a difference. 1 to 3 affirming people in your life can be life saving. So it's be one of those people. If you still attend church, I know a lot of people who attend church and will wear rainbow pins on purpose or rainbow ties, and just kind of giving a sense that, you're not alone here. So if you're one of those people that feels like you can do that, that's making a difference in the community. All right. The last few comments just from people watching around this topic. So Catherine Klaas says, when I first spoke out on Holland's talk, I had friends tell me that it was a talk for the staff, not for the public. So I ought to leave it alone, which I didn't buy into. Now it's required reading for the students. Yes, this is oftentimes what happens when we bring up critiques, is that people in the church will just kind of make excuses, or will, just say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Nobody really pays attention. It wasn't meant that way. These kinds of things that people say. And we really need to start looking at that, because the people who are most vulnerable are listening, and they understand the message. This is, I think minimizing is not healthy behavior as humans in any topic. And this goes along with religious topics as well. Jody England Hansen says, I can't imagine that the church would exist as it does today if the priesthood ban had not been lifted in 1978. It is hard for me to imagine any way it could have a real future if doctrine, quote unquote doctrine, and practices do not become more inclusive for women and LGBTQ+. And I do think, kind of back to maybe Trisha's point, is that the church is really in a quandary right now. They want to stay the same. I think all systems try to resist change. And so they're no different than any other system. And so they're resisting change. And that's, what point is that going to become untenable? We'll see. Unfortunately, I think, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has a track record of being behind the times versus in front of the times when it comes to social justice issues. And that is incredibly sad for me as somebody who grew up believing that we had, powers of revelation and powers that would give us an idea of actually being in front of these issues instead of behind the issues. So I think that's a dilemma. And I think that we're seeing it play out live. Unfortunately, there is casualties that go along with playing that out live. There are casualties along the way that are very tragic. Okay, moving on.
And that was my point, is even with the, priesthood ban, no one, if you were in a interracial marriage, you couldn't get married at the temple, and now you can. Like the doctrine, I know that the church, the institution says doctrine never changes, and we have proof that it changes. It does change, and it is way late. But I cannot imagine a world where this doctrine doesn't change at one point. I hope I'm alive for when the doctrine changes, because it's not the God that I believe in that would keep anyone out. Anyway,
I want to come to your church.
I want to come to your
The church of
you would love my
Trisha.
church. It's yoga and coffee We would have so much fun. So.
Oh yeah, I'm coming there. The Celestial Kingdom seems really lame anyway. I don't want to go there.
Yeah. Well, we'll be in hell together. It's good.
That's right. Hell Together. You want to talk about David? David Archuleta's new song, Held Together, Trisha?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell us about it.
Well, I haven't heard it, so I can't.
Oh, you haven't?
No,
Oh.
I just was reading about it, and
It's
I was
so
like,
good.
oh gosh, I got to listen to this.
It's really good.
I
So-
can't speak on it yet, but
Yeah,
I am a David Archuleta fan.
He wrote a song about coming out to his mom, and his mom said, well, if heaven doesn't have you in it, I don't want to go to that heaven, and so let's go to hell together. And it's a really good song, and I think it's going to have a really big impact. I mean, I'm so proud of David for speaking out and not going quietly and using his platform for this reason. I think it's super powerful.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Well, and that gets to, so first of all, I do think that, Trisha, your point is a good challenge to a lot of people who will say the doctrine never changes. That is not true. That is not true.
Oh, it's not true. And I mean, obviously, like, why do you want to be in an organization where you're a second-class citizen? That's frustrating.
Absolutely.
And number two is, like, for me, I'm always like, well, the T in LGBTQ means there are trans people. It's not just sexuality. It's not just a cis gay guy and another cis gay guy. Okay. Mm-hmm. Gender is essential to Mormonism. It's not black and white. That wasn't essential to Mormonism ever. Mm-hmm. Like having a black member versus a white member. Gender is like the foundation of the church. Priesthood, being a man, being a woman. So that complicates things to, like it won't even be the same church without gender. It will not even be the same church. It's like, okay, so we have like, okay, whatever gender everybody has at the priesthood, like we love Jesus, the end. Like it's not going to be the Mormon church at that point. So it's not really the same thing at all. The race stuff and the queer stuff, different ballparks, in my opinion.
But I think like I look at President Nelson and he is like a boomer, right? Like, and that generation is like, they don't apologize. My way's the highway. This is how we do things. Like that generation is known for that.
They got to die
off. And even those brethren have children or grandchildren that are part of the LGBT community. And I think it's easier in that generation to be like, oh, it's a trend, to like put it into this like stupid basket.
Sure.
So I'm curious as the church evolves into new generations, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who doesn't know someone in the queer community.
I'm not arguing with any of that. That's all true. I just think
who's standing up for these?
Doomed.
Is it, I mean, that's always my like question is like, who's standing up for the orthodoxy is so like, it's just shocking to me.
That's why the church,
even though I know many people that do.
Yeah. I mean, I think most members like are good people and they don't want to be exclusionary, of course, but they support an organization that is. And that doesn't feel safe to me for myself.
Well, and I always say it's like border control heaven, right? Like you have to have your papers to get in.
Yeah. No, the handshakes.
Okay. So
Kelly, sorry.
Last comment. Kelly says, as an intersex person, I just want to know at which testosterone level I'm allowed to hold the priesthood. Right. So yeah, these are very complex concepts. And I think, so back to the point, I think the point I just want to end on is that for people who, how I like to say it, like to hide behind God's skirts, right? And say things like, well, God, it's not my bigotry, it's God's bigotry, right? Or the doctrine never changes. Or, I think you need to kind of understand the history of any church, that there have been significant changes. We are in flux and change right now. That's not an excuse you can hide behind. And I don't think it's a very well thought out excuse just to hide behind, your perspective of who God is. So, moving on to another topic, which I think goes along with kind of some of these gender things, and also with some of the misogyny that we see in the church. Let's see, Trisha, you have a topic you wanted to bring up.
I was going to bring up the viral Instagram post from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. First of all, I was shocked that the church would post it. And I'm curious what the church thought when they posted it, what they thought would happen when they posted it. But Annette Davis from the General Relief Study Presidency, I have it here, the quote. She says, "There's no other religious organization in the world that I know of that has so broadly given power and authority to women." And with that came, we're at 17,000 comments from women of the church. And the thing that I loved about the comments as I read them is I was worried. I'm like, if this is too emotional, it'll be disregarded. And I felt like the comments were not emotional. They were bullet points. Show me where we have authority. If I can have, as a man is presiding over this meeting and all of the different, I think sometimes we're like, we want to believe we have authority in the church because we are daughters of God and we are so amazing and precious and loved. And yet there's no data behind evidence of authority in the church for women. So the fact that she would say that over the pulpit was shocking. And then the fact that they would highlight it was where I was so shocked, because I thought, what does the church think is going to happen with this? This is not how the church would want to go viral, I'm sure.
Any initial thoughts on what this was about and how it was received?
It just makes me think of Kate Kelly's comment a decade ago, where she said equality is more than a feeling. Mm-hmm. And all of the diagrams started coming out showing, how many talks have been given by women versus men in general conference, and even prayers, and that people were starting to operationalize the idea of equality. And I think that's just been so fascinating, because when we talk about like priesthood authority versus priesthood power, right, which is the direction the church has taken and said, oh yeah, we give women priesthood authority to do all these things. Okay, well, great. So you're giving people more of an ability to offer selfless work that serves the church, right? You can like say prayers, and you can like fulfill callings, and like go on missions, and like do all this stuff that benefits the church, and the people around you with priesthood authority, or what they're calling priesthood authority. But what about priesthood power that actually includes like sitting in roles that make big decisions that impact the church as a whole, that could impact your family, like any of the larger systems, that matters. And so I love that those diagrams are starting to pop back up again on social media, and people are starting to have that conversation, because we have to move beyond the idea of power as just kind of this like warm, fuzzy feeling in your heart. And I think that's what these women are feeling, is that they're like, no, show me, literally, because just feeling like I'm important in the church isn't adequate anymore. That's exciting.
But isn't it shocking, had one of us posted that, it wouldn't hold the weight of the church posting that. Because now you've got all of these Orthodox members seeing this and reading all of the comments and seeing how women can feel. And I've had a lot of women say, I don't want the priesthood. Like, I don't want that power. I don't want the priesthood. And it's like, okay, so that's okay that you don't want the priesthood, but we should be treated equally. We shouldn't be, for me personally, my husband had left the church years before me, and I was veiled, covenanting to him, who isn't a member, in the temple. And I know that has changed, right? And maybe we shouldn't talk about that, but there is so many evidences of, I yield to you. I yield to the man, right? Even growing up, my little brother, when my older brothers went away, I was yielding they became the patriarchs of the home. We yielded to them, even though they were significantly younger. And that wasn't just a thing of my family growing up. My parents were preparing my brothers to be leaders in the church and in their homes, because it's a patriarchal society. And it's in every single facet of the church. You have to go. And I was a primary chorister. I couldn't bring a song in to teach the children without the permission of the bishop. So no decision can be made without the permission of a man. Even small decisions is singing a song in primary.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the church is conflating power and authority with opportunity to serve.
Yeah.
I do think that there is lots of opportunity for women to serve in the church. In fact, I think they're taken advantage of oftentimes through this kind of this sacrificial lens, right? That we're supposed to lose ourselves to the Lord and, lose ourselves in service. And many, many women in the church do amazing amounts of really talented work that's unpaid labor for the church. That's a constant issue that's happening as well. And I can see like the church's perspective on this. If I'm trying to look through their lens, it's like, well, but we have a lay public, right? We have a lay leadership, right? So we have women in leadership roles, like Relief Society president and president of the women's organizations, presidents of the children's organizations, president of the young women's organizations, which, back to your point, Sal, this is all very gendered and, very black and white. And I would say, even as a member myself, I did benefit from being, a speaker at church. I learned speaking skills. I think learn some leadership skills in the leadership positions I was in. I gave a shitload of my time and money to the church that I was never, really reciprocated as far as, the only way that the church has ever paid me for my services is in my professional capacity as a therapist, right? So they do pay therapists for services at times. But I think even to say that we are the biggest organization that does this, to me, feels a little bit narcissistic. Like, I lived in evangelical Wichita for, 10 plus years. There are mega churches where women are doing all kinds of things there too. They're running Bible studies. They're, taking care of the children. They're coming up with, youth programs. So we're not the only organization that allows for service or leadership. There's pastors' wives who are speaking to the congregations. There's, pastoral counseling that's done by the wives of the pastors. I mean, women have active roles in most of their church communities, right? Whatever churches they belong to. And then I think where they're really gaslighting us on this one is that we have the power of the priesthood. I have never been confirmed the power of the priesthood as a female member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, not like the men are, where they're, the hands are put on the heads and you have been given this power. And so it's kind of like this floaty power that they like to say, no, but you've had this power all along. But like, to your point, there's nothing I can do with that power. I guess I can pray over my children. I guess I can, pray over my household, but I can't make decisions, like you're saying, for my church community. I'm not even really supposed to lay hands on my children, like a priesthood member would, although there's been a few comments here and there that allow for it that are weird and kind of fringy. And again, it's like, well, that fringy thing was said 20 years ago, so we have the power. And I'm like, but it's not like actual practice. We don't see women laying on hands in our church community, or laying their hands on heads and giving blessings. And
but I think they're talking about the temple in that phrase.
Yeah, even in the temple, I was confused. The first time I went to the temple, I was like, oh, I think that these women are doing something priesthoody, but nobody explained it to me. Nobody said, and if those matrons are given some type of power, nobody's talking about that. Nobody's saying, oh, by the way, this is the ceremony that matrons are able to now do certain things the priesthood leaders would do. So it's like, was I given the priesthood in the temple? Nobody ever really said that specifically, right? And so, this is just gaslighting like 101. And what I find fascinating about this comment section is that, boy, did they unite the sisters. The post-Mormon sisters were on there. The nuanced sisters were on there. I think even some of the more traditional sisters were on there. Like nobody was buying this. So the LDS sisters united on this one. It's like, we're not buying it. We're not buying it. So
yeah, that was encouraging to see. I really loved seeing everybody speaking out. It was awesome. And, you know, I think it's all silly because the priesthood's just some thing somebody made up. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's just like, okay, what? Hands on that. The other week, we were with a bunch of our friends, ex-Mormon friends, and we went to a gay bar and we gave each other priestess blessings. It was awesome. We all put each other's hands on our heads. And it's just like, come on, guys. Like, what the hell are we talking about? And I know people take it seriously, and I know it is a big thing. But like, let's not kid ourselves. You go to church and you see men on the stand. You don't see women. You see 12-year-old boys giving you the sacrament. The girls don't get to do anything. The girls have to do the shitty stuff, like all the hard work, the labor, the mindlessness, you know, like primary. We get to be in like, that's so annoying. Like, we have to be with the little kids and do all the housework. I mean, literally, it was called homemaking. Like the Relief Society once a month thing, homemaking. It's just, I can't believe I took my daughters there to see even if we have some priesthood, it's clear that women are also second-class citizens. Like, we are a marginalized group within the church, and you don't have to tell a little girl that. They can see it and feel it.
Yeah. My female assigned at birth child, when they were 5, asked me that question. Why is it only the boys who are doing this?
Yep.
Already understanding that meant something for them and their lived experience in this church community I was taking them to. Right.
So sad.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think as Susie Benson says, lose yourself to serve others. How did I ever think that was okay? You know, so I think there is a lot of sacrifice mentality that really does not help women in the areas of perfectionism, depression, self-care, you know, anxiety. Chris Gibson says, who runs the world? Girls. It's pretty normal in all arenas that the women are doing the most. So I think this is obviously another issue that is very problematic because the church is way behind on this one, right? I think in the 1950s, most churches had these issues, right? But we do have female ministers, we do have female pastors, we have females who are running church organizations, making all the financial decisions, making the decisions as to the content that they're going to be providing. Those are not things that you will find in the LDS/Mormon world. I had probably the biggest position you could ever have in a ward, right? I was the Relief Society president of that ward. And all of my decisions, you know, were basically had to be approved of by the bishop. I worked very closely with the bishop, but I could not make unilateral decisions without his. I couldn't even be in the building without a man in the building, right? I couldn't open up the building on my own. I didn't have keys to the building. Like, these are not things that I had authority of, even though I was running, you know, I had the biggest power I could have as a woman in my congregation. So it's kind of a silly talk. It's a silly quote. I think it just shows, I think, a little bit how out of tune they are, the bubble that they're living in, how out of tune they are with just overall ideas. You have women now, and I've heard a lot of women who come in who are still active members of the church, and they struggle with this. It's like at work, I'm the executive. I run a multi-million-dollar company. I make decisions all the time. And then I come into my church community and I'm treated like, you know, a fragile kind of female that's supposed to be taken care of and who's supposed to be monitored and presided over. That's not resonating with people's lived experiences anymore. So I don't know.
Well, and I think any Orthodox member that's a woman has a story where she was prayerful, fasted, felt like she received revelation, went to her bishop, and was shot down in 30 seconds.
Mm.
Yeah.
And that's where you're like, so I don't have authority. I received personal revelation. You shot me down in 30 seconds. And that's really telling. And, Jennifer Finlayson in 5, she does a whole seminar retreat on finding your desire, because so many women in their selflessness lose themselves completely. They don't know what they think anymore. And I have people in my life where I'll say, what do you think about this? And they'll say, let me see what the brethren say. And that for me is a huge problem, that you can't go into your own mind and see what you think about something without checking with the brethren first. But I think that's a problem that's vast among Orthodox women. Mm-hmm. And I'm hoping that this viral post is giving them pause.
Yeah. We have Sarah Forsberg saying, yes, Sal, at 8 years old, I got to do quarterly activities and the boys got weekly Cub Scouts. I was so envious watching their privileges. And then as an adult, I was in the primary presidency and saw the discrepancies in funding for girls versus boys. So frustrating. I was an activities day leader for the girls. I had that same issue. If we could spend $40 a month, that was a big deal. It was ridiculous, right? The budgets that we had and how much then monies or time I would put into it out of my own things to just help them have equal opportunities. Catherine Klass says, I think people like Brad Wilcox would say women claiming they have priesthood authority are just playing church, as Brad said about other religions. So how can the church reconcile that with what the General Relief Society counselor said? And Chris Gibbons says, as a leader in Young Women's, I refused to teach lessons I didn't agree with and would speak up when others did. For that, I was called in for talks by the bishop, but it didn't go how he expected.
Way to go.
Way to go.
Proud of you.
Any final thoughts on this one?
I think the most damage that I have seen, the most serious damage I've seen, really like personal level, well, not me personally, but like I've seen and heard of so many women going to the bishop about like being mistreated sexually, physically in their marriage or by other people, and that being shut down and then being silenced and being encouraged to stay in an abusive marriage. Mm-hmm. So many stories of this. Yes. And that is not, that's not the case when a man comes in and talks about, his wife, his what, and so many stories of like, there's a sexual, sin and the woman has to go through all this repentance process and the man gets like a slap on the wrist. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's dehumanizing and very like dangerous from what I've seen.
Any thoughts from you, Michelle or Trisha, as we finish up this topic?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite comments that I saw online in all of this was something along the lines of, if you're having to tell a population that they matter and that they have power, then they probably don't. Like we're not telling the men, you matter and you have a place in this church and you're so important to us. And look at all the ways that we've given you power and authority. Like we don't say that to the men because they have it. And so it's just an interesting dynamic to try to like tell some people things that aren't actually true. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the essence of lip service instead of.
Well, which reminds me of how much lip service we give to saying we love gay people. Yeah. We're not like, oh, we love you, cis het people, right? You have a place here with us, right? We're only doing that because it's not true. It's not the lived experience. It's not, you can't back it up with any evidence other than you're just uncomfortable and trying to come up with, kind of apologetic ways to deal with these issues. One other thing I was thinking of, not only, I totally agree, Sal, that there's danger in this as well, because when women don't have power and we already have misogynistic or sexist issues or domestic violence issues, that puts them even in less, more of a vulnerable space to get the help they need. I think of this even just as a sex therapist from the space of drive and desire. Right? Like, why do we have such a huge orgasm gap in this community? Why do we have so many women complaining of low desire and low drive? And I'm like, well, when you're put underneath When you're put underneath the person you're supposed to be having sex with, right? And when you're put into this kind of like power differential of now I have somebody presiding over me, how might that affect my drive? How might that affect my eroticism? And then also to the point that was made about how women are treated differently, kind of disciplinary ways. I have so many examples of this, but a recent couple that got excommunicated due to lifestyle things. They were opening up their relationship sexually, consensually together as a couple. He got a letter of excommunication that just said, you've been excommunicated. In hers, there was like 3 more sentences about the law of chastity missing from his letter.
Wow.
And I'm like, why do we have to, I would think that they would have done them both the same at least, or why does she have to get the extra slut shaming from the church discipline?
That's exactly what it is.
So there is a lot of virtue monitoring around women, a lot of modesty monitoring around women that is not the lived experience usually of men, even though all should be held to the same standards of the law of chastity. But even that is not the same lived experience in our church community. So
true.
Well, can I say one thing? I was just going to say, I would challenge all the women to challenge their husbands that go to church and switch things in their minds. And now it's no longer a bishop, it's a woman. And just hearing how we as a church talk about women, thank you, sisters, for taking care of, if you were to switch that to the brethren, thank you, brethren. You are the wind beneath our wings. You really help us get through everything. And we don't know how we could do it without you. You matter. It's implied that I matter, but you matter. If you switch the roles on everything, which obviously is still the gender issue that Sal brought up, which is a huge issue. But I think if you could switch that, it gives you a pretty good perspective of the patronizing statements that are said every single week from the pulpit about women to women that we're supposed to be so thankful for. And we're so used to it, I don't think anyone hears it.
Yeah, exactly. When you're swimming in it, it's hard to notice it. Amy Alibis did a letter called Dear Mormon Man, Tell Me What You Would Do years ago now. And she did this very good, like kind of what you're talking about, like just switching the roles and having a man imagine what it would be like to sit in a church environment where everything was turned upside down, right? And how you were talked to, who you got to see in the leadership roles, who was making all the decisions, how people were referred to, all of that. So that's an interesting resource to look at as well. And last comment I'll mention here, Kelly Truss says, don't even get me started on the male-female gap of treatment with the honor code at BYU, extra slut shame expert over here. And I recently did a podcast with Kelly Truss about her experience getting kicked out of BYU due to, sexual confessions and things of that nature. And how she was treated very differently than the cis man she was having a sexual relationship with. Catherine Klass says, I watched last night the movie on Hulu called Good Luck to You, Leo Grande, and it was just what I needed to see. It's about a post-menopausal woman wanting to explore her sexuality for the first time after her husband dies, so she hires a sex worker. She has to go through the spectrum of embarrassment to being able to make a list of things she wants to try to feel confident. And it also discusses pleasures and the orgasm gap. Yeah, this is not an LDS/Mormon only problem, because misogyny and patriarchy, we're all swimming in it in one way or another. It's the constant territory that we're trying to make progress in. So we have made a lot of progress, but there's still a lot of progress to make in this world. All right, everybody. Well, I know we've kind of gone over our time. Thank you so much. This was a fascinating discussion. You can tell we have all like our feelings about it. We understand the intricacies between, respecting like what people believe. And, a lot of people have, dear relationships with the church. I know that a lot of people are very harmed by the church. Here at Symmetry, we really try to hold space for both, right? And to have conversations that are difficult and that we're not used to having as a community, because you can't, disagree. You have to kind of conform. And so these are interesting things. And I think all of us are affected by both queer people in our lives or whether we're queer ourselves. And all of us are affected by females in our lives, whether we're female ourselves. And so these two topics are kind of at the crux, I think, right now of what the church is dealing with. And I think all of us within the community, whether we consider ourselves in, out, or in between, are dealing with very deep, profound thoughts and feelings about these topics. So good luck, everybody, and take care of each other. And we're here to help you find your best path forward. And we hope that this has been a helpful conversation. So
sending love.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Natasha Helfer Podcast. To help keep this podcast going, please consider donating at natashahelfer.com and share this episode. To watch the video of this podcast, you can subscribe to Natasha's channel on YouTube and follow her professional page at Natasha Helfer, LCMFT, CST-S. You can find all her cool resources at natashahelfer.com. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or feelings of Natasha Helfer or the Natasha Helfer Podcast. We provide a platform for open and diverse discussions, and it is important to recognize that different perspectives may be shared. We encourage our listeners to engage in critical thinking and form their own opinions. The intro and outro music for these episodes are by Otter Creek. Thank you for listening.
There is a place where time slows to nature's pace, and there is space there to find yourself in her embrace. Some places should be left alone. Now tishki say the so we can always go to the homeland of the heart. 10,000 years of our human history etched on her canyon walls, alongside Earth's mysteries. Some places should be left alone. Nahotishki so we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart. Deep in our cities, we sleep without her stars, yet still her presence sustains us from afar. Some places should be left alone. Nahotishki so we can always go to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart, to the homeland of the heart.